This is a quick Swiss Army knife restoration project for a friend. I believe this one is the Victorinox Climber. It seems to have become corroded, particularly at the aluminium liners, so difficult to get it closed. There was a lot of what looked like salt or other kind of debris stuck in all over the place. Even the scissors won't open spontaneously, they need to be maneuvered open. So the first step of the restoration is to get the scales off, and we do that by warming them with some hot water. This blue plastic is possibly different to the standard red, but it seems to respond in the same way in that once it's warmed and a little bit softer, you can kind of flick the scales off with a fine blade between the sides and the scales. These will usually tolerate doing that once and then go back on without losing their ability to hold themselves, but more than that, they get less and less reliable. Next is just a quick clean with some soap. And then the disassembly of the knife. So 4 pivot pins, if you like, and the smallest one has a round domed head on it, so it's necessary to file that flat in order to get some purchase with the drill. I use a pin punch to try and separate the initial part of the pin as it's being teased out, and then put a fine Stanley knife blade between the liner and the first spring to get that to pop off. In the case of the smaller rivet, even though I'd flattened the head, it was still quite narrow to get the drill tip to sit on without skirting off sideways, so made a little divot with the 3mm burr on the rotary tool. It's also quite a good tip to push the drill bit further into the drill chuck so that you don't have as much sticking out, because it stops it from flexing. It gives it better stability when you're making your initial drill hole. And after we separate everything, we soak it in some vinegar to help get the corrosion to lift off, and so I just left it there for 24 hours and then try to just clean the rest of it off with some steel wool. And then after it's been in the vinegar, I usually put it in some solution of sodium bicarbonate, which is just baking soda, about a heaped teaspoon in a jam jar. It's possibly not necessary to put it in the baking soda, it might just do to rinse it, but that seems to be what other people do. And then this one shows how much corrosion there is on the liners, and that you can see deep crevices in the metal. It's important to save these little brass washers that go on the head of some of the rivet pins, because that's how the scales attach. And finally, the difficult bit, I deliberately didn't show the reassembly of the knife because it's just tedious and very, very difficult to watch. Just takes a lot of persistence. And so I've put masking tape over the end pins, which helps to keep everything from springing apart, which it wants to do, and also holds the washers in place. I know that I'm using the ball peen hammer the wrong way up there. That's just because I can't get it to sit directly over that small pin due to the proximity of the adjacent one. Now, the ideal amount that the pivot pins stick out by is very small. It's less than 1 millimeter, and it's probably about the thickness of a thumbnail, so that's a rough guide. You really don't need to tap it very hard to get it to sort of mushroom the head with the peening hammer. Check periodically to make sure you haven't overdone it, because the tightness can easily be overdone and it's hard to undo. And finally, it's important to check for lateral play once the blade's open, so you can have quite a reliable snap when you open and close it, but it's also possible to have that with laxity in the lateral plane, so you need to manipulate that to check that you've tightened it up enough. The scales should just snap back on, but often needs a bit of force, so it's often recommended to use a clamp with some plastic caps so you don't damage the scales.